We're working through the book, and I'm trying to give overviews so that you have a handle on how the whole thing fits together before we go and look at all the details, but we will have time to get to those details. So I'm going to pick up where I've left off in that whole process, and to do that, we'll do a little bit of review as far as to how the book flows, and I'll just be using some material out of some of the slides to help us visually just refresh ourselves in that regard. What I want to look at today is the conclusion of the matter, getting ready for the final exam. So it's going to be material toward the back of the book that comes after Solomon has pretty much finished his discussions, and it's him applying what we've been seeing that he's about. And I'll fill you in kind of as to where we are in that process. And again, we're reading lists like the great piece of literature that it is. It's a complex piece of literature, and you can't deny that. A lot of repetitions and so forth. And one of the things that you do when you're reading certain kinds of literatures is to take a peek at the conclusion. Now, if you're reading a murder mystery, you don't do that, or a thriller, you hold off on that because that's the whole point. But other kinds of literature, it's wise to do that. If you're reading a philosophical treatise, if you're reading a research paper on something, look at the titles, look at the chapters, look at the section headings, look at the conclusion, read the conclusion, and then start putting it together. And so that's good advice in general in reading, and it's excellent advice with regard to reading Scripture, particularly the book of Ecclesiastes, because it does have a lot of elements that are kind of at cross purposes, it would seem. And so that's what I'm doing, is trying to give us an overview, and we're going to be looking at some of the concluding remarks. In other words, how Solomon goes about applying this book, applying this material. And we have enough understanding from what we've done so far to make sense out of that, but I will go back and look at the rest of the parts. So just a little bit about how the book flows. We've looked at the author's role indicators in the first verse, that he's a preacher, an assembler into the presence of God, of God's people. He's the son of David, and that probably looks at him as a shepherd of God's people. And he's the king of Jerusalem. It gives him the ability to not only have the time, but the wherewithal to carry out these examinations from every conceivable place. We've noted that it began with a metaphor, thinnest of vapors, all is a puff of breath. And it's important to leave it as a metaphor until you figure out what the metaphor is there for. And when you change it into an abstract concept and then try to interpret the book on the basis of an abstract concept, especially if it might be the wrong abstract concept, then it creates problems. The very next verse gives us the second part of the comparison, which is what a metaphor is. It's a comparison of two things that are unlike but have some kind of similarities. Is the question, what does man gain from all his labor in which he labors under the sun? And so that's what we've been working at, is this whole quest of Solomon's, where he is frustrated with answering that question with regard to his particular task. Then there is a poem which talks about ages coming and going, but the earth remains forever, and then it talks about certain cycles in nature that occur on the earth, the sun and the wind and the rivers. And then it makes a statement that gives us this idea that these unceasing activity and wondrous beyond description, yet and this is embraced without boredom. It's not looked at as meaningless, but there is an incompletion in it. There's a limit to what these observable phenomenon reveal about the whole system. What God chooses to reveal across all of time does not and can never explain all there is to know about the whole. And even in our scientific age, where we have discovered tons of things about the material universe, we still don't know how and why it all fits together as it is. And the most positive scientists think we'll get there someday. Most reasonable scientists realize we probably never will, but we still keep learning. And that's how the book opens, with this regularity, and yet there's a mystery and an incompletion to what we can know. So we've got the title, metaphor, question, poem, and then we have a double introduction in the book where Solomon is going to talk about his quest and his personal activities, and then of a philosophical nature. And in chapter 2, he starts the first investigation, or carries out the first investigation, and ends up being frustrated over his own experiences involving work and wisdom. And so we saw that these two introductions focus first of all on him from a standpoint of wisdom, exploring the works of God. And he comes to the conclusion, I really enjoyed my labor. I really enjoyed my labor. And then he looks at the whole of life from the standpoint of wisdom and folly, and more of a philosophical. And he says, this is the bane of folly, what goes on in the public sector. He then kind of brings those together and says, I've really enjoyed my work, but it really aggravates me that I might leave it to somebody who won't appreciate it. And that just is frustrating, okay? And he concludes with the first refrain, well, with all of that frustration and with the lack of the ability to really come to grips with what I want to come to grips with, what we should do is live life joyfully, live life in appreciation of what the good is in labor. So this begins then the 4 key searches with regard to this whole endeavor of trying to put together God's providence, the big picture. And so we find frustration over his own experiences involving work and wisdom, frustration with respect to tracing the cause and effect in God's works. That's in chapter 3. Chapters 4 and 5, which we haven't looked at yet, frustration over the existence of oppression and rivalries. And then in chapters 6, 7, and 8, frustration over the seemingly inequitable ends of various individuals. We will get to those. But there's a hole here, and it's a hole that I've often puzzled over. And it's chapter 3, verses 14 to 22. And we looked at that, and that's where it talks about God working that we might fear him. It starts out 3:14, I know that whatever God does, it shall be forever. Nothing can be added to it, and nothing taken from it. God does it, or works it, that men should fear before him. And we looked at that whole concept of the fear of the Lord as that which is absolutely foundational and critical to the whole perspective of wisdom literature. It starts with the fear of the Lord. And then that ends, so I perceive that nothing is better than that a man should rejoice in his own works, for that is his heritage, for who can bring him to see what will happen after him? This is a very positive section, and I've debated my whole life as to just how this works and how this actually fits in. And I've thought at first that this last statement might be just the continuation of the refrain that was started just above it. But I've since decided, no, it's its own standpoint. And in fact, I think it's very likely the center of the whole book. And this is something that is not uncommon in Hebrew literature, actually ancient Near Eastern literature in general, for to be the main point of something right smack dab in the middle. Now, we don't do that in our Western mentality. We either put the main point up front and we say, okay, now let me tell you how this develops and how I support it. Or we might state it, but we build and build and build it, and then we put it in at the end. But that's not generally how Hebrew literature works. And what we have here, when I suspect it might have a chiastic structure, it's kind of a technical word from the Greek word chiasma, which basically means crossing. And at the X, the Greek key gives us a cross. And you see this all the time in Hebrew poetry. For instance, you're reading Proverbs or Psalms. This occurs all the time. This is a kind of a phrase where you have this crossing. I will praise you in the morning, and then you say the same thing, but you say it in reverse order. At the rising of the sun, I will proclaim your name. You see, it's an A, B, B, A pattern. And you see this all over. In fact, we've already encountered this in the book of Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes 3:1 says, for everything there is a season and a time for every purpose under heaven. That's a chiastic structure. Now, it's very, very common in these two-line sentences where you're saying the same thing, but saying it in a different way with an alternating starting and end point. But there are large structures like this in the scriptures. And I'm just going to do this very quickly to illustrate the fact of them, and then just to leave this, that I'm working on the assumption that these few verses in chapter 3 are really the center, that it all comes down to this, and everything can be related to this. But there's a scenario like this in 1 Samuel when David is running from Saul, and his life is in the balance. And there's a very, very interesting structure. I've taught a Life of David as a college course, and this came out of those studies. But we see in chapter 21 of 1 Samuel, David's fleeing Saul. The first thing he does is he stops and requests Ahimelech, the priest, requests them to give him aid. Then the next we find Achish and the Philistines rejecting David. The next thing we find is Saul murdering the priests. Then we find David and Keilah striking the Philistines. And then the Ziphites betray him, and yet Saul is spared instead of Saul killing him as a result of the Ziphites' betrayal. And then we find one of the most unusual and important scenarios in all of Scripture, and that's David in his encounter with Abigail. And basically, Abigail undertakes to keep David from falling into the blood guilt of taking innocent lives in a wrongful manner. He's ready to do that. And she intercedes. It's an interesting chapter. It's a remarkable chapter. It's a long chapter. And Abigail, I think, becomes the key focus on David finally becoming qualified to be king. And what we find then after Abigail is this. The Ziphites betray him, and Saul is spared again. David is in Philistia striking the Amalekites. Saul consults a medium at Endor. Achish and the Philistines reject David again. And then David inquires of Abiathar in rescuing the family from Amalek. Is that accidental? It's not accidental. It's intentional. And what this shows us is that now David is ready to be king. The other thing you find as you look at all that runs up to that, A, B, C, D, E, is that in all of those, David made some misstep. Some misstep that he often immediately says, I wish I hadn't done that. Or he looks back and says, oh, that was bad. Shouldn't have done that. You don't find that at all in the parallels coming out. So this is very common in Hebrew structure. And that's why I think it's very very likely that that's what's going on, or at least that's what I'm working at now, is that one section where you've got encouragement, and the encouragement to fear God, and the encouragement, here's what God is doing. In all of this stuff that I'm working at, pondering, God's doing it all so that people might come to faith. Now, that's important, isn't it? If that's the center part of the whole book. And so we have this, at least in this, you have this in the middle of four frustration experiences with a failure to come to grips with God's providence. So that's we'll come back to those last two experiences and look at that center part later in our studies. After that, in chapter 8, beginning in chapter 8, the last two verses of chapter 8, we find summary findings regarding the quest to understand God's working. So here he starts to sum things up. And the tone of the book really changes. It changes remarkably. And when you read through, I'm sure you have seen some of this. And then in chapters 9, verse 13, we have a big long section that reads more like Proverbs than anything else. And so, okay, what's that doing in here? Well, he's going to teach about wisdom with regard to, okay, you're frustrated, but still, you're supposed to live wisely. And he'll throw in some of the reversals here, but it's still more like proverbial type teaching. And then in 11:9, he shifts to actually admonition. Okay, here's what I want you to do. Here's what I'm commanding. Here's what I'm instructing. And so we get to the point where it's just laid right out. And so he's doing that, starts that in chapter 8 with the summary findings. And now here he basically says, get to it, don't waste your life. Serve God, live for God, enjoy the life that is given to you as he has told you to live it. And then, of course, the epilogue, which we have looked at in piecemeal. So this is kind of how the book lays out, and if you've been reading, this will help you process it in the overview. What I want to look at today are these two in the dark text, summary findings regarding the quest to understand God's workings, and then the admonition to not waste one's life. That'll be just in summary form. But we'll look at three parts this morning of this. First of all, the report of a failed task, discerning God's workings. Discerning God's workings is impossible. Conclusion about man's present state. The condition of non-living is inevitable. That sounds kind of strange, but I'll explain that when we get there. And then the best possible advice, live life in the present and to its fullest. So this is his, okay, now you've listened to me, let me just put it all together here. Here's what I want you to come away with. Here's what I want you to come away with. So, looking at the summary findings regarding to this quest to understand God's providential workings, and that's what I've been working on with regard to how to understand the book. And first of all, we find the report of the failed task in the last two verses of chapter 8. By the way, you'll notice the chapter divisions here aren't good for major topics. Have you ever seen that anywhere else in the Bible? Yeah, where did the verse and chapter divisions come in? What date? I think it was the 1500s AD. So last two verses of chapter 8, as it's numbered in our Bibles, it says, "When I applied my heart to know wisdom and to see the business," that's our task word, "that is done on the earth, for also there is that neither day nor night sees sleep with his eyes." So there's no matter how much effort you give to this. Verse 17, "Then I saw all the work of God, that man can't find out the work that is done under the sun, because however much a man labors to seek it out, yet he won't find it. Yes, moreover, though a wise man thinks he can comprehend it, yet he won't be able to find it." Now, this is the frustration repetitions we saw in the book. It reminds us of what we saw in Ecclesiastes in 3:10 and 11. "What profit has he who works in that in which he labors? I've seen the burden which God has given to the sons of men to be afflicted with. He's made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in their hearts, yet so that man can't find out the work that God has done from the beginning even to the end." So he's summarizing this, and 8, 16, and 17, I think, are kind of the best summary of that whole failed quest. So basically what he's saying in here is wise insight. And Solomon is saying, I claim to have the wisest insight around. And nobody, dispute that. The Queen of Sheba came and she would say, yep, he's got the wisest insight around. So he's bragging, but he's bragging because he wants people to see that he's the one who's qualified to think through these things, and he's delivering his findings. So wise insight into God's business on earth. Now again, you notice I've got the works, the word works here, and I've color coded, so this is consistent throughout the book. So basically, he's considering God's business, or what God's at, what God has busied himself with. And what is it? His works. Notice here, David he's not, or Solomon isn't trying to discover the meaning of life. He's trying to discover what about God's workings is it that helps me to understand them as a totality? Okay? And these texts make that just abundantly clear. And so you notice the emphasis on the word work in here, business that is worked on the earth. I saw the work of God, that man can't find out the work that is worked under the sun. And then because however much he labors to seek it. So all of the it's here are referring back to the work. So he's looking at God's work. The sun rises, the sun sets, all the meteorological activity, the stars, people on earth because God's the governor of the earth. I mean, just everything. History, science, nature, whatever there is part of God's work. And that's what he's looking at. Well, the outcome of his investigations, though, is utter frustration, no matter what the effort. And we've seen that as the consistent theme throughout the book. So he's just reporting in this section in chapter 8, this failed task. And this is going to lead him then into what our response ought to be. So God's business is to do it, to do all things. Our business is to ponder it. He's put eternity in their hearts. And we learn a lot of things about the world that are useful to us, but we won't learn the big picture thing. We won't be able to say, oh, yeah, you want to know why God allowed that to happen? Well, let me tell you. Now, we do that all the time, don't we? And when somebody's doing it to us, we shake our heads, oh, yeah, sure, you think. And then we turn around, do the same thing in another topic with somebody else, and they're shaking their heads inwardly, oh, yeah, you think that's what it is. But we do that, don't we? But we can't. So Solomon has done it, and he honestly says, I can't figure it out. So then he moves on in chapter 9, verses 1 to 6, to talk about the conclusion that he's come to about man's present state. And so this gets interesting with some of the verbiage that's used. And again, if we take it just a verse, at a time, it's crazy. We can do all kinds of interesting things. He says, for all this I laid to my heart even to explain this. Now, before we've seen this statement recur with regard to heart, where Solomon has said, I applied my heart to. In other words, I put my mind to trying to figure this out, okay? Now he's turned it around. Now he's using a figure like we take things to heart, okay? And so he's saying, I've taken this into my being, into my whole process, emotional, mental, and I've let it have its impact. And so that's a little turn with the use of heart here in the Hebrew text. And so he says he's taken all his investigations to heart, and he's now moved to declare the application. And the word explore, it can mean explore sometimes or to make things clear, but the Hebrew word here probably should best be translated explain. So I've taken it to heart. I've gleaned from it what God wants me to see, and now I want to explain it to you. Okay, I want to make it clear to you. And here it is. The righteous and the wise and their works are in the hand of God. We're in God's hand. And if you go back to that, what I think is the center part of the message of the book, God does it all. What? That we might fear Him. So we're in God's hands. We can rest in God's hands. We can know what God wants for us. We can experience what God wants for us, even though we don't do it with an understanding of all that there is about His working. Now, the word translated works here in most translations is not the word we've been encountering in work, the color-coded word. That's a word that has to do with the accomplishing of something. This word is a word that's related to the word servant. And the word servant has occurred a number of times through the book, but these are works of service. And so that's a different idea here than the works that Solomon has been thinking about. So what we have here are deeds of service. And deeds of service are those activities that come out of a wise living, a living by faith, a living in the fear of the Lord. And so they're positively noted by God, and they'll be rewarded. So the Bible talks, from beginning to end, about serving God, about honoring Him, doing what He asks, doing things that please Him. And so that's what Solomon has moved to here. The righteous and the wise and their deeds of service in the hand of God. When you serve God, does He accept it? Yeah. Do you always see the immediate outcome? Maybe not. Can you rest confident that God's aware of it and that He's going to handle it appropriately? Yeah. And that's the point that Solomon is making. So these are positively noted by God. They will be rewarded. And so he says, yeah, I've been frustrated in my quest, but let me tell you, there's good news. Okay? You can serve God. You can serve God confidently. You can serve God and know that He's looking at it. He's taking it into account. And you're not serving Him to gain His acceptance. He already has. You've come by faith. And so you tie that back to that middle section about the fear of the Lord. And this is a very, very positive statement. So that's the state of individuals who are rightly related to God through fearing Him, through trusting Him, through believing in Him, and through serving Him. He goes on in the latter part of this first verse, down through verse 3, to say this: whether it is love or hatred, man doesn't know what all is before him. So you don't know what's coming tomorrow, huh? Okay, you don't know. You pick up that first phone call in the morning, you don't know who it's from. Most of us don't pick up phone calls that we don't know where they're from. But if you do, you don't know if it's going to be positive or negative. You don't know if the first person you run into or don't run into at an intersection is going to be positive or negative. I mean, life is like that. Now and then. All things come alike to all. There's one event to the righteous and to the wicked, to the good. Oh, one event. I wonder what he's talking about here. Well, to the clean, to the unclean, to him who sacrifices and who doesn't sacrifice, all is the good. As is the good, so is the sinner. He who takes an oath is he who fears an oath. There is an evil. And this word evil, it occurs in this translation most consistently for the Hebrew word ra. And sometimes it means moral evil, but a lot of times it just means bad. Okay? Had a bad day, you'd use the word ra. Okay? Somebody stabbed somebody to death. He did ra. He was evil. So the context determines the word. We've got words that are like that, okay? So here, this is a bad and unfortunate thing, not something you look for in all that is done under the sun, and that there is one event to all. What's the one event? You see it coming? Yeah. Yes, also the heart of the sons of men is full of evil, and madness is in their heart while they live, and afterward they go to the dead. So he's got, no matter what you are, there's one event that everybody's going to share in. It's death, okay? Now, what he's going to say about death is going to be interesting. So there's uncertainty as to what might happen to us. That's the human plight. We just don't know what a day brings forth and, so forth. What we do know is, no matter who the person is preparing to serve God or running from God, the person who loves God or hates God, the person who's bad or good, doesn't matter. One thing that everybody's going to experience is death. So no matter how we live, death is inevitable. Now he's going to work here on this whole idea of death and dying, not in the way we might suspect, but in a very, very interesting turn. So basically what he's saying here is people are full of evil and irrational thinking while they live, and then there's death. So what he's going to move here to is thinking about the people who have not embraced his way of life, who have not embraced the fear of the Lord. And I think what we find here is a very pastoral, evangelistic appealing sort of a sensitivity. He wants people to think through how they're living and to make the right choices. And so he's going to say, death's coming. And yeah, that's what all people. I mean, the New Testament says it's appointed unto men once to die, and then what? Another life, another chance? No, judgment. And so he's going to do the same sort of a thing, but we're going to find a very interesting twist on it. So he goes on in verse 4 of chapter 9. For to him who is joined with the living there is hope. For a living dog is better than a dead lion. Well, there you go. For the living know that they will die, but the dead don't know anything. Neither do they have any more reward, for the memory of them is forgotten. Also their love, their hatred, and their envy has perished long ago. Neither have they any more a portion forever in anything that is done under the sun. So, what? Poetry, not just poetry, Hebrew poetry. Not just Hebrew poetry, but Hebrew poetry of how many thousand years ago. And, we all know how we love poetry in school. I just had a conversation with a young person and said, poetry, I hated poetry because they make you think there's really a meaning to it. And, you ought to be able to just, put your own feelings into it. So we had a little discussion about authorial intent and so forth, which, I don't know. But anyway, poetry, So it's poetry. So we're going to have to deal with it. So first question is hope. Hope of what? Hope of what? Well, he makes a comparison here between what? A living dog and a dead lion. Okay? So dog, lion, living, dead. Which pair here is more being emphasized? The animal pair, dog, lion, or the living dead? Living dead? Yeah. So when you look here, for him who is joined with all the living, there's hope. The living dog, the living no. So yeah, that's okay. So living. So what point is he wanting to make here about the living? The living. Well, let's just see. The dead, he says, don't know anything. All right, they don't. So we got the living and the dead. The living, he says, know they will die. All right. Now, when you look at the whole book, when it says the living know they will die, he's casting that in a positive sense. And what he's going to go on to say here is that knowing that you're going to die should make all the difference as to how you live. Now, the Bible says that from beginning to end. And we know that we can trace that out in all kinds of books and the New Testament. But this is how Solomon is getting hold of it. So the living know that they will die. Okay? Then they know a lot of other things too. That's all he mentions here. The dead don't know anything. Okay? They don't know anything. They don't have a reward. Their memory of them is forgotten. Their love, hatred, and envy have perished. They don't have a portion of anything done under the sun. And so he says a number of things about what the dead don't have. They don't know anything. They don't have a reward. They don't have influence. They don't have a portion. When? In what regard is the question? In the afterlife or in the present life? And what he's talking about here is not the state of being dead or the state after being dead. What he's talking about here more is the state of not living. Okay? And I want you to see this. So he's talking about in this life, under the sun. Once you've died, you can't experience anything more that you did when you're under the sun. Now, he's not making a statement about the eternity. He's not making a statement about eternal destiny. He's just making a statement about having left life as opposed to being in life. So I think the point here is that even though someone might be living like a dog, it is only the living who are granted the potential of living life joyfully and glorifying God in the process. So what he's saying is more, I want people to realize that when they die, they have either experienced or not experienced living life as a gift of God. And I don't want them to miss that. Now, I've written this, and I can write better than I can pull things off of my head. So let me just share this and see if this helps solidify that in your thinking. So on living dogs and dead lions, Solomon's objective is to portray life on earth, that is under the sun. Okay, that's all under the sun means, the life we live now in this body, as something to be enjoyed as a good gift from God, which is to be lived out as an act of obedience to Him. And this is where we get this idea of deeds of service that have just come into this context in 9:1. It's only those who are still joined with all the living who have the hope of enjoying and displaying this kind of life. For that reason, Solomon observes that it is better to be in this life, even though that risks being dishonored, a live dog, okay, than to be a dead lion that may be honored but is no longer conscious of this joyous living experience. He says, the dead do not know anything. Solomon is not denying a resurrection experience of bliss for the righteous. In fact, this whole section of the book, 11:9 to 10 and 12, is an exhortation to live life in light of the fact that coming evaluation and experience. So he's not denying an afterlife. I don't think the Old Testament does. The Old Testament doesn't have as full a description of what happens after death as the New Testament does, but the New Testament doesn't have the fullest, complete, does it? There's a lot of things we don't know, okay? I go on. The living know they will die and enter that state, 9:5. However, the dead are no longer receiving the wages, the reward of living life under the sun. That also means that they no longer have the opportunity to demonstrate to others the benefits of wise living because their experiences have been forgotten by those who are still here. Those life experiences include what they loved and hated, which revealed their value system. They don't love anything, they don't hate anything, so we don't, nothing there to tell about. A person's living experience also displayed what he was zealous for, what really motivated him in life. For the dead, those things have already perished from the perspective of shared humanity. Therefore, it is only the living who can respond to Solomon's recommendations regarding joyful living. So, does that make sense? Does that make sense? That he's not talking about being dead. He's talking about not being alive, and therefore not being able to engage with life as a gift that God gave, that we should live to His honor and glory and live as its own reward in the process, even though there's labor and toil involved in it. Does that make sense? Okay. So you see, this is for the person who maybe isn't there yet with, okay, yeah, I'm going to get a hold of life, and so it's. He's just talking about here's what it is missing out on living. Don't become dead, having missed out on what it is to live, I think is the idea that makes most sense here. And when it talks about, you see, what he's been investigating, as you just saw, is God's works. Well, what's he talking about? God's works somewhere in heaven? No, God's works under the sun. God's works that we can see, that we can examine, that we can think about, that we are part of, that we experience. And so it has nothing to do with it's what God has worked on earth. And what God has done is He's made the living of life an empirical, tangible, hands-on thing. And He's there to guide that. And if we accept that life as a gift from Him, then He's going to give us information about the living of that life. Well, he moves on then to some advice. Live life in the present and to its fullest. And he gives 4 little scenarios here. I think there's 4 here, in terms of just some directions. First of all, he says, "Go your way, eat your bread with joy, and drink your wine with a good heart, for God has already accepted your works." We don't find the same word here for enjoy or rejoice that we did in some of the other refrains. And this really isn't a full refrain. It's a refrain returned into the admonition. Before he said something like, "I found nothing better than that. You should go and eat and do this." Here he says, "Go and do it." Okay, now that's a change. Okay, so you can see how we're into an application, admonition section of the book. So it's changed to an admonition, and it's got a familiar tune: eat with joy. Okay, and but again, it's probably not. I don't think that's the same word. And yes, it is. It is the same word. And then drink your wine with a good heart. That's kind of a new twist. And your works are accepted is a new thing. So there's just some variations here. He's moved. He's moved to more. Okay, now I want to just boil this down and get you moving in that direction. So this new component that assures us of God's pleasures. Here's just a short list of some of the things that the Bible says God's pleased with: sacrifices, the king, the servant, Messiah in Isaiah 42, those who fear him, uprightness, seeking good, praying. So God is pleased is more the idea here. Not a reward type thing. It's not here what's going to happen when we die. It's just know that when you do something as an act of faith that you know God approves of, he's saying, "Thank you, I accept that." You know, sometimes as Christians, we wonder if we can ever do anything pleasing to God. I mean, I'm in a body, I've got sin, I've got these attitudes, I don't know motives, why I'm doing this. What's this text say? And other texts? No. God says, live by faith and you'll obey me. I'm pleased with that. I accept that. And I want you to know that. And when you know that, that in itself is a reward. That in itself is sustaining, isn't it? Okay? Children know their parents love them and care for them and know their parents accept them, or they don't. And the children that don't know that, and sometimes it's not the parents' fault. Sometimes it's just the children just can't believe that anybody could really be pleased with anything they did. That's hard to live like that, isn't it? In fact, it's impossible to really live like that. And so this is a fact of faith. If I know what the Bible says pleases God, and I do that, then I have to accept that he's pleased with that. And that's living, isn't it? And that's part of living this life as the gift that God has given to us. These things reflect God's character and God's values. And therefore we can go forth and we can enjoy life, and we take it as a good gift, and we don't doubt it. We don't bemoan it because somebody overseas doesn't have a meal. Therefore, why should I be happy eating one? God says, I'll take care of that. You take care of taking life as I give to you as an act of faith. So when a person lives life as a service to God and truly values and enjoys that life as the gift that is, then joy can be taken in the knowledge that God has immediately taken pleasure in that life's accomplishments. So we do works, and Solomon was working to try and understand. So he, grew groves and so forth. Well, there was immediate satisfaction from those accomplishments, even though they didn't help him with the big question. And so it's just that life is here, and as I live it, God's pleased with it, and I can by faith accept that. Years ago, there's a movie, Chariots of Fire. You all remember that from my era, anyway. And it was about Eric Liddell, I think was his name, who was headed for China as a missionary, but he was a runner, and was at the 1936 Olympics. He ran in, won the 400 meters. But his sister, who was headed for the mission field with him, was concerned that his running was getting in his way of maybe of serving God. And at one point in the movie, he says, well, I know that God's made me for China, I think he said, but he's also made me fast. And when I run, I feel his pleasure. That's what this is saying. When I run, I feel his pleasure. When we live life with joy, the life that God has given us, and whatever little menial task it is, then God is pleased. And we should feel his pleasure. So that's the first command there. Then the next one is, let your garments be always white and don't let your head lack oil. It's just talking about having a positive attitude of celebration as opposed to grief and mourning. If a person intentionally wears black all the time, they're trying to make a statement, a negative statement, okay? You do wear black when you go to a funeral because, it's a time of grief and mourning. Basically, he's saying life is to be lived positively and let people see that, you're positive. That's the point. It's an attitude of enjoyment as opposed to a troublesome, careless demeanor. So, just not letting yourself go. It's just, this is my body God's given to me. I can only do so much with it, but I'll do with it what I can do with it and do it unto him, okay? So basically, it's just kind of a poetic way of saying, be joyful and let your joy be seen. Let your joy be seen. Not in a manufactured, trite sort of way, but just in genuineness. So personally, that's what we can do. Relationally, he says, most translations say something like live joyfully, but it's probably something, but it literally says see life, look at life, behold life. With the wife whom you love all the days of your fleeting life. Here, I think vapor probably is the idea of fleeting, that which just kind of, flitters away like steam or mist, which he's given you under the sun all your fleeting days, for that is your portion in life and in your labor in which you labor under the sun. So something like, what he's using here is just the closest, most endeared relationship between two human beings, as husband and wife, okay? It's not saying you can't view things commonly with other people. He's just taking that because it is the most when you join two perspectives in living one life as husband and wife, you see things clearer, deeper, longer. Okay, so it's a mutual, purposeful intention to look at life from the blended perspective of marriage, which is the most intimate relationship experience. Life, even with its wearisome labor, is most profitably experienced when husband and wife share its benefits and perplexities. So here again, it's just relational. And when we go through the section where he's talking about wisdom literature, he's going to talk about relationships. Two are better than one, and so forth. And there's help and whatnot. And so it's that sort of a thing. So he said, relationally, my advice is in that relationship, you have the unique experience of being able to see into things in ways that you couldn't just single. Okay, and so there's a relational aspect, and this experience, he says, has its own immediate reward. This is your portion. This is what one of the things you get out of marriage. One of the things that's God's gift. One of the things that's sustaining and fulfilling in and of itself. That's part of the gift of life. And then occupationally, he says, whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might. For there is no work, nor device, nor knowledge, nor wisdom in Sheol where you are going. Now, this doesn't mean that, if I find I'm good at a computer game, I should just sit there for 23 hours a day and, play my computer game and take the other hour to eat. That's not what it's talking about. It's not talking about wasting time just because you're good at something. What it's talking about, if God's, given you the ability to be productive in some area, do that. Do that. So The work that God gives and suits us for should be done well and thoroughly now, is his point, okay? Because we are not guaranteed makeups for missed opportunity. And this is a theme that's going through all of this. Live life now. Don't live life waiting for retirement as though that's when you're going to start living, okay? Back when we had a young family, Kathy and I started riding a motorcycle, and we had several motorcycles through the years, and we kind of said, well, when we retire, we're going to buy gold wings, and then we're going to go touring, okay? So that was just sort of, the out there dream, And we were sort of half serious about it. We probably both knew that it was never going to happen, and it didn't. Okay. But so many people, they don't live now because they're waiting to live out there somewhere. If not in time, at least in some other circumstance, other situation. The book of Ecclesiastes says that's not what God's intending. Live life to its fullest now. You don't know what's going to come down the road. You don't know what your health is going to be. Don't wait for retirement. Don't wait for some circumstance. Live life now. My brother wrote a book called When God Calls Encore. He pastored a church for a while in Sun City West, which is a retirement community. And, he says there's kind of a disconcerting thing with baby boomers. When they retire, they quit ministry. They're involved in ministry all their lives, and when they retire, it's like, well, I'm also retired from serving God. And he basically shows scripturally that's not what it should be. When God calls encore, in other words, okay, now I'm ready. Are you ready for your next series? Serve him. Serve him. There's never a time to retire from serving and honoring God and receiving life as a gift from him. So that's the idea that Solomon is bringing out here in these aspects. So live life in the present and to its fullest, and then he concludes with this very interesting thing. I returned and saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, neither yet bread to the wise, nor riches to men of understanding, nor yet favor to men of skill. But time and chance happen to them all. For the man who doesn't know his time, as the fish that are taken in an evil net, and as the birds that are caught in the snare, even so are the sons of men snared in an evil time, when it falls suddenly on them. Now, Proverbs basically says, if you do this, expect this to happen. And generally in life, the fastest do win. Okay? And the wisest do succeed. But not always. And that's what this book is about. So basically, he's saying the preceding advice should be followed. Live life in the present and to its fullest, even though unforeseen reversals are sure to arise. And they do. And they do. And so this is a name, Mary Decker, comes to mind. I think she was a world record holder. It was the 800 meters. And she was supposed to win the Olympics. And the race that she was either in, it's the Olympic or qualifier, she got tripped and fell. She didn't even finish the race. I don't know if you remember that. Tragedy. I saw that on TV. And, there are no guarantees. There are no guarantees. So that's how he ends it, not as a put down, just as the reality. Generally, life proceeds as it should, but not always. Not always. And that's what he's encountered in God's world. So here's some instruction in wise living, even though reversals are encountered along the way. And so that's what he does in 9:13 through 11:8. We're not going to go through this. We will unpack this later. But in 11:9 he says, "Rejoice, young man, in your youth. Let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart." Basically, he's talking now to the same person as he did in Proverbs. The young person, become wise. Don't go down the path of foolishness. And so basically he says, don't waste your experience. In chapter 12, he says, remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before evil days come, before the sun and the moon and the light lose their shine, and before the silver cord is broken. What he's discussing here is old age. Okay, we will come back and look at that. And then the last few verses of the book, the shepherd has spoken. The preacher was wise. He taught the people. He set in order many proverbs. The preacher sought to find acceptable words of truth. The words of the wise are like goads, like nails well fastened are words of the masters of assemblies. So these are his concluding thoughts. Now, this may well have been appended by an editor. That doesn't mean it's not part of inspired scripture. And then we've looked at this before in a little bit of detail. The end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments. You know, and that really goes back to that statement in chapter 3. God works all things that people may fear him. And that includes those things that we don't understand, that we don't like, that we wouldn't do that way, that we can't understand how it fits with his justice and with his mercy and his goodness and the moral governor of the universe. All of those things, if we let them, will bring us to a faith in God and to a deeper appreciation in our walk with God. So again, despite the frustration to understand God's providential designs, we must live life as a gift of God. And that's what we've focused on today, that when he starts to make application, that's what he's getting at. And he's giving reasons and examples of what that's about, and then cautioning the person who is waiting, who's putting it off. Well, I always got time for that. I'll do that later. No, now is the time. Now is the time to take God at his word, to take life as a gift from him, to fear him, to honor him, to serve him, and to know that those activities in themselves are sustaining, and that in the long run we will be better off for it as well. And again, that part of it is the responsibility, knowing that we will give account to the one ultimately. There is going to be an accounting after death, but there's also a responsibility to live life now. And that's what Ecclesiastes is majoring in. That's what Ecclesiastes is designed to help us to process and to come to grips with.